Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. I'll make sure that you have my mother's phone number so you can call her and let her know. I do want to pick up on a little of what you said about COVID and also the conflict, because I've said before and what I believe, which is there have been 3 C's in the last 3 years that have changed the world: COVID, conflict, and coercion. And every country and every society is adjusting, as you noted, their frameworks, their strategic outlook, because of those 3 C's. And we're literally in the beginning stages of that adjustment. This is my 3rd speech, 3rd and final, and I want to thank you for letting me participate in your forum and your speaking process and commission. Obviously, this is an ongoing process. The first speech I gave was at Tokyo University. It was on economic coercion, and it was prior to the Hiroshima G7 summit. And it was about the history and the practices of economic coercion by China. Japan was the first country, as it related to rare earth materials and minerals, to be targeted. Korea in 2017, the Philippines, Lithuania, and Australia. In each case, economic coercion is using an economic tool to enforce a political outcome and to restrict another country's political independence or political agency. Each country in that situation, and we chronicled it in that speech, whether it was the Republic of Korea making a decision as it related to the deployment of THAAD, dealing with its own security related to North Korea, or Australia asking God forbid, the question, what was the origin of COVID, and let's get to the bottom of it. Or Lithuania as it related to their position on Taiwan. But in each case, that country economically was targeted. And make no doubt about it, economic coercion by China is the most persistent and pernicious tool in their economic toolbox. The second speech at Sophia University was about debt trap and the countries that have been ensnarled in China's debt trap. It is again, first these loans are given and promised as part of economic development, and then they become ensnarled and entrapped in China's economic and fiscal and financial web. In each situation, those countries lose their economic in certain cases, meaning their infrastructure, whether they're ports, airports, railway, they lose them, and they also become majorly indebted to China. And in the process, they lose both their economic and political independence and agency and sovereignty. The debt trap and coercion are different tools. The objective is the same. And now, a decade later, as it relates to Fukushima, we're back at economic coercion by China. I say that by way is because just a little while ago, we released pictures of a Chinese fishing boat in Japan's EEZ, fishing for the same fish that are embargoed by Japan. I'm glad you appreciate the humor. Now, I suppose I could ask, since China's decided to continue to fish in Japan's EEZ, but embargoed all the fish off the coast of Japan, for a show of hands of how many believe that this embargo has something to do with public health and public safety and the well-being, since the very fish that are being caught on that ship right now will be served in China. I'm open to any show of hands that believe that this is really about public health and about the well-being of the Chinese people, or something to do with scientifically based area. Now, the irony is that fish and the fish in that trawler, and that happens every day in the Japanese waters. China is engaged right now in fishing off of Japan's waters while they are simultaneously engaged in a unilateral embargo of Japan's fish. The intention was to isolate Japan. And my belief is China is being isolated. And that effort. Second is, I do want us all, before I get on to the main part, is to take a question and relate back. And that is, Fukushima happened a decade ago. COVID happened a little over 4 years ago. You're going to have an incident. They're both, God forbid what happened, 100-year public health problem as related to COVID. An incident in Fukushima had consequences here in Japan. Something will happen in the future around the world. The question we all have to ask is, which set of protocols do you want another country to adopt and follow? In the case of Fukushima, Japan was scientifically based, internationally cooperative and collaborative, and fully transparent. There is nothing related to COVID from China that is internationally collaborative and cooperative, transparent, and based on science. There is still information the world does not know. And in the future, there will be an incident. There will be a moment where something horrific will happen. And the question before all of us, an international institution, and when it comes to leadership in the world, do you want another country to follow the practices and protocols adopted by Japan, or the practices and protocols adopted by China? As it relates to the debt trap, in each of these situations, China does not participate in the OECD and international system and following the rules and the level of transparency that other countries adopt. And a lot of headache would be avoided if China did that. And in each of the situations, whether that's in the case of Sri Lanka and their port, Zambia and their power infrastructure, Ecuador and their hydroelectric dam, in each of those situations, the international community, the IMF and the World Bank are called to extend loans and help countries deal with the debt that they've incurred in those situations. And in many countries, not limited there, they lose control and ownership of the very infrastructure and investment that they've taken. Their political sovereignty, economic independence, is now being ensnarled in the financial and economic web of China. And in many situations, not all of them, because of the stress of paying back China, it leads to political instability, as you've seen in Sri Lanka, as we've seen in Pakistan. So in those situations, again, politics is the end goal. Control or dominance or inability or to attempt to hinder another country's political independence, and using economic tools or financial tools to achieve those political objectives. And in each case, whether in the areas of coercion or debt trap, the international community or international rules come to the savior. How did Australia survive 3 years of COVID kind of economic embargoes, economic restraint, economic coercion? Because they had many other economic relationships. How did Lithuania deal with China's coercion? They were part of the EU. They were part of a greater economic system that they could rely on. So confronting coercion, as the G7 did here in Hiroshima for the first time ever, is key to pushing back on one of the most persistent and pernicious economic tools in China's toolbox. And when it comes to going forward, as it relates to the debt trap from China, making sure that countries know the small print, making sure they understand the full obligations that will come, so they don't lose either the investment, their economic independence, or their political agency in that process. And again, as I said earlier, in many times, China takes possession of those key strategic infrastructure assets. And this all brings us up to this point here, which is the issue as it relates to the regional behavior by China in this area of the Indo-Pacific. How they enforce, through either force, belligerence, or aggression, their view of the world. Now, in other places, I have talked about kind of three concentric circles for China. The core is a relationship between the PRC and the Chinese people, what I call the calm circle, where they try to ensure that there's a belief in the Chinese dream. The PRC is given authority and power based on the premise that you will also get prosperity. That is under tremendous stress right now. The second circle is a regional one, which I called the conflict circle. First one is calm, the outer circle is conflict, is their relationship with countries in the region. And then the third outer circle is what I refer to as the charm circle, where they're just refer to themselves as a benign player looking for economic relationships with countries and peoples around the world. And in this region, the conflict region, China has put out, as recently as the end of August, early September, a new map. And in that map, they have given you their view of the world, their view, rather, of the region. They have done this before. In this map, you have had situations and places where Japan, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, even Russia, have raised objections to that map. Now, the difference is they have presented this map in the past. The difference is it's a playbook in which they're running that play right now. From the Himalayan mountaintops to the islands off of Philippines, they are in one way or another in conflict with countries trying to make that map a reality, trying to enforce it piece by piece. Now, I happen to think the Prime Minister's speech in Shangri-La was correct and succinct and had foresight in 2022 when he said, today's Ukraine can become tomorrow's Indo-Pacific. And what we do matters. And I say that by way of there's a pattern here, a clear pattern, whether with India, whether with the Philippines on the Thomas Shoal, whether in Japan's EEZ, whether in Vietnam or Malaysia. If you look at it, there's a ring of aggression going back. There's been over since 2021, 60 registered conflicts between Chinese ships and other ships. Philippines, just as recently as the other day, but going back to 2016, the International Court ruled on behalf of the Philippines on their decision, and China has ignored the International Court. Malaysia in 2021, as related to their state energy firm, involved in the exploration activities, and Chinese vessels try to disrupt that. 2014, Vietnam faced challenges when China was trying to, the drilling rig was harassed by the Chinese Coast Guard. India, as recently as just 9 months ago, on their border with China. There is a pattern here as it relates to both the map, their view of the world, and their aggression. Now, this is important for all of us because also in 2015, in the Rose Garden, China declared that we would never militarize the South China Sea. And since that time, nearly 3,200 acres have been, in fact, exactly that, militarized. And this is all the more important because while it's important to study what's happening on the battlefield right now in Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine, tactics, weapons, it's also important to study what happened before then and what did happen. Obviously, President Putin said Ukraine doesn't exist. He has a view also of a map of countries or not countries on his border, on the border rather of Russia, and is willingly to do certain things to enforce that. And we stand here today because this is not just another map. There's a series of actions taken by China. And that means what in those years between 2007 and Putin's speech, in 2020, Putin's speech, President Putin's speech in the Munich Defense Conference, to the starting of the war on the Ukrainian border in 2021 and also in 2014 on Crimea, what could have been effective and credible deterrence? And that's the question today. And studying not just what's happening now, but what did and did not happen before then is critical to understanding what, as the Prime Minister noted, how to ensure that what happens today in Ukraine does not happen here in the Indo-Pacific. That means understanding what credible and effective deterrence is. And it's to ensure also that the rules, the international law, and the accepted norms are adhered to. And making sure that in this place, we have a series of takeaways and that we study them and then start to apply them. Just here in Japan alone, in the last year, there have been 5 missiles fired by China into Japan's EEZ. Chinese maritime harassment of the Senkaku Islands, both the tempo, the frequency, and the severity of the violations near the Senkaku Islands has increased dramatically. There has been a historic reference to Okinawa and China asserted as the illegitimate territorial claims. There's conducting by China military patrols and exercises and strategic bombers flying over the Sea of Japan rather. Banning Japan's seafood, the arresting of Japan's corporate executives, and as recently as the other day, installing buoys in Japan's EEZ. Now, the United States and Japan stand shoulder to shoulder in a period of time, as I said, adjusting to what is both COVID, conflict, and coercion, and the relationship has evolved from alliance protection to alliance projection. And in this last year and a half, under Prime Minister Kishida, Japan has taken, I think, the proper steps to make sure that deterrence is both credible and effective, increasing its defense budget so it will go from the 9th to the 3rd largest in the world at the end of 5 years, up to 2% of GDP, acquiring certain capabilities like counterstrike, participating and being a full partner and active shaper of both Camp David and the Camp David principles. I add that, and I want to take one moment aside. A lot of times we only think of deterrence by what you're doing from a military standpoint. Deterrence has multiple dimensions. The diplomatic, development, and defense, all 3 of those. And Camp David was no doubt part of that deterrence. recent U.S., Japan, and Philippine Coast Guard trilateral exercises. As we are sitting here today, 1,200 U.S. soldiers are training alongside 23 Japanese troops in Orient Shield, strengthening the deterrence by enhancing skills in cybersecurity, electronic warfare, and intelligence. Exercise Resolute Dragon and Keen Edge, coming up, will validate operational concepts and reinforce our integrated and multi-domain deterrence. And in the last 2 years, the United States and Japan have dramatically expanded both the scale, the complexity, and the scope of our exercises, and with multiple partners at an unprecedented level. Japan has adopted a CFIUS law and been a full participant in ensuring and securing the supply chains. Those are just a few items in the last year and a half to ensure that the deterrence is credible and effective. Going forward, the United States and Japan will obviously work on bilateral exercises and training in areas including the Southwest Islands and Senkaku Islands and the mainland of Japan. Obviously, through the trilateral that was achieved in Camp David, since that time, the ministers of defense of the three countries have already been on the phone, and part of that Camp David principle calls for intelligence sharing in real time, military exercises and planning. That too will be part of the deterrence going forward. Optimizing the alliance force posture based on improved operational concepts and enhanced capabilities. Strengthening, again, areas of economic integration with the two countries. But make no doubt about it, we're in a different period of time. And I want to again thank you for this conference today, the opportunity to speak, but to also talk about, from an integrated perspective, how to see coercion, debt trap, and the aggression in the region in a comprehensive whole, what the United States and Japan as partners, our number one ally, not just in the region, but across the globe, in ensuring that our values, our principles, and our shared vision work together in a collaborative way, and making sure that we effectively bring our deterrence up to the level to meet the challenges of the future, so that the international system, the rules-based system, the respect for the sovereignty of other countries is respected. Thank you.